This is a reading of a selection of excerpts from Thomas Carlyle's Signs of the Times, 1829. How often have we heard for the last 50 years that the country was wrecked and fast sinking, whereas up to this date the country is entire and afloat? The state in danger is a condition of things which we have witnessed 100 times, and as for the church, it has seldom been out of danger since we can remember it. All men are aware that the present is a crisis of this sort, and why it has become so. The repeal of the Test Acts and then of the Catholic disabilities has struck many of our admirers with an indescribable astonishment. Those things seemed fixed and immovable, deep as the foundations of the world, and lo, in a moment they have vanished, and their place knows them no more. Were we required to characterize this age of ours by any single epithet, we should be tempted to call it not an heroical, devotional, philosophical, or moral age, but above all others, the mechanical age. It is the age of machinery, in every outward and inward sense of that word, the age which, with its whole undivided might, forwards, teaches, and practices the great art of adapting means to ends. Nothing is now done directly or by hand, all is by rule and calculated contrivance. For the simplest operation, some helps and accompaniments, some cunning, abbreviating process is in readiness. Our old modes of exertion are all discredited and thrown aside. On every hand, the living artisan is driven from his workshop to make room for a speedier inanimate one. The shuttle drops from the fingers of the weaver and falls into iron fingers that ply it faster. The sailor furls his sail and lays down his oar, and bids a strong, unwearied servant on vaporous wings bear him through the waters. Men have crossed oceans by steam. The Birmingham Fire King has visited the fabulous East, and the genius of the Cape, where there any Camions now to sing it, has again been alarmed, and with far stranger thunders than Gammas. There is no end to machinery. Even the horse is stripped of his harness, and find a fleet fire horse yoked in his stead. Nay, we have an artist that hatches chickens by steam. The very brood hen is to be suspended. For all earthly and for some unearthly purposes, we have machines and mechanic furtherances for mincing our cabbages, for casting us into magnetic sleep. We remove mountains and make seas our smooth highway. Nothing can resist us. We war with rude nature, and by our resistless engines come off always victorious and loaded with spoils. What wonderful accessions have thus been made and are still making to the physical power of mankind! How much better fed, clothed, lodged, and in all outward respects accommodated men now are or might be by a given quantity of labor. It is a grateful reflection which forces itself on everyone. What changes, too? This addition of power is introducing into the social system how wealth has more and more increased, and at the same time gathered itself more and more into masses, strangely altering the old relations and increasing the distance between the rich and the poor. This will be a question for political economists, and a much more complex and important one than any they have yet engaged with. But leaving these matters for the present, let us observe how the mechanical genius of our time has diffused itself into quite another province. Not the external and physical alone is now managed by machinery, but the internal and spiritual also. Here, too, nothing follows its spontaneous course. Nothing is left to be accomplished by old natural methods. Everything has its cunningly devised implements, its pre established apparatus. It is not done by hand, but by machinery. Thus, we have machines for education, Lancastrian machines, Hamiltonian machines, monitors, maps, and emblems. Instruction, that mysterious communing of wisdom with ignorance, is no longer an indefinable, tentative process requiring a study of individual aptitudes and a perpetual variation of means and method to attain the same end, but a secure, universal, straightforward business to be conducted in the gross by proper mechanism with such intellect as comes to hand. Then we have religious machines of all imaginable varieties. The Bible Society, professing a far higher and heavenly structure, is found on inquiry to be altogether on earthly contrivance. Supported by a collection of moneys, by fomenting of vanities, by puffing, intrigue, and chicanery, a machine for converting the heathen. It is the same in all other departments. Has any man or any society of men a truth to speak, a piece of spiritual work to do, they can nowise proceed at once and with the mere natural organs, but must first call a public meeting, appoint committees, issue prospectuses, eat a public dinner. In a word, construct or borrow machinery, wherewith to speak it and do it. Without machinery, they were hopeless, helpless, a colony of Hindu weavers squatting in the heart of Lancashire. Mark, too, how every machine must have its moving power. In some of the great currents of society, every little sect among us, Unitarians, Utilitarians, Anabaptists, Phrenologists, must have its periodical, its monthly or quarterly magazine, hanging out like its windmill into the popular aura to grind meal for the society. With individuals, in like manner, natural strength avails little. No individual now hopes to accomplish the poorest enterprise single-handed without mechanical aids. He must make interest with some existing corporation and till his field with their oxen. In these days, more emphatically than ever, to live signifies to unite with a party or to make one. Philosophy, science, art, literature, all depend on machinery. No Newton, by silent meditation, now discovers the system of the world from the falling of an apple, but some quite other than Newton stands in his museum, his scientific institution, and behind whole batteries of retorts, digesters, and galvanic piles imperatively interrogates nature, who, however, shows no haste to answer. In defect of Raphaels and Angelos and Mozarts, we have royal academies of painting, sculpture, music, whereby the languishing spirit of art may be strengthened, as by the more generous diet of a public kitchen. Literature, too, has its paternoster row mechanism, its trade dinners, its editorial conclaves, and huge subterranean puffing bellows, so that books are not only printed, but in great measure written and sold by machinery. These things, which we state lightly enough here, are yet of deep import, and indicate a mighty change in our whole manner of existence. For the same habit regulates not our modes of action alone, but our modes of thought and feeling. Men are grown mechanical in head and in heart, as well as in hand. They have lost faith in individual endeavor and in natural force of any kind, not for internal perfection, but for external combinations and arrangements, for institutions, constitutions, for mechanism of one sort or other do they hope and struggle. Their whole efforts, attachments, opinions turn on mechanism and are of a mechanical nature. We may trace this tendency in all the great manifestations of our time, in its intellectual aspect, the studies it most favors and its manner of conducting them, in its practical aspects, its politics, arts, religion, morals, in the whole sources and throughout the whole currents of its spiritual, no less than its material activity. Nowhere, for example, is the deep, almost exclusive faith we have in mechanism more visible than in the politics of this time. Civil government does by its nature include much that is mechanical and must be treated accordingly. We term it indeed in ordinary language the machine of society, and talk of it as the grand working wheel from which all private machines must derive, or to which they must adapt their movements. Considered merely as a metaphor, all this is well enough. But here, as in so many other cases, the foam hardens itself into a shell, and the shadow we have wantonly evoked stands terribly before us and will not depart at our bidding. Government includes much that is not mechanical and cannot be treated mechanically, of which latter truth, as appears to us, the political speculations and exertions of our time are taking less and less cognizance. Nay, in the very outset, we might note the mighty interest taken in mere political arrangements, as itself the sign of a mechanical age. The whole discontent of Europe takes this direction. The deep, strong call of all civilized nations, a cry which everyone now sees, must and will be answered, is: give us a reform of government, a strong structure of legislation, a proper check upon the executive, a wise arrangement of the judiciary is all that is wanting for human happiness. The philosopher of this age is not a Socrates, a Plato, a Hooker, or Taylor, who inculcates on men the necessity and infinite worth of moral goodness, the great truth that our happiness depends on the mind which is within us, and not on the circumstances which are without use. But a Smith, a Delorme, a Bentham, who chiefly inculcates the reverse of this, that our happiness depends entirely on external circumstances. Nay, that the strength and dignity of the mind within us is itself the creature and consequence of these. Were the laws, the government, in good order, all were well with us. The rest would care for itself. Dissentients from this opinion, expressed or implied, are now rarely to be met with. Widely and angrily as men differ in its application, the principle is admitted by all. Equally mechanical and of equal simplicity are the methods proposed by both parties for completing or securing this all-sufficient perfection of arrangement. It is no longer the moral, religious, spiritual condition of the people that is our concern, but their physical, practical, and economical condition as regulated by public laws. Thus, the body politic, more than ever, worshipped and tendered, but the soul politic less than ever. Love of country in any high or generous sense, in any other than an almost animal sense or mere habit, has little importance attached to it in such reforms or in the opposition shown them. Men are to be guided only by their self-interests. Good government is a good balancing of these, and, except a keen eye and appetite for self-interest, requires no virtue in any quarter. To both parties, it is emphatically a machine. To the discontented, a taxing machine. To the contented, a machine for securing property. Its duties and its faults, and not those of the father, but they are of an active parish constable. Thus it is, by the mere condition of the machine, by preserving it untouched, or else by reconstructing it and oiling it anew, that man's salvation as a social being is to be ensured and indefinitely promoted. Contrive the fabric of law aright, and without farther effort on your part, that divine spirit of freedom, which all hearts venerate and long for, will of herself come to inhabit it, and under her healing wings every noxious influence will wither, every good and salutary one more and more expand. Nay, so devoted are we to this principle, and at the same time so curiously mechanical, that a new trade, specially grounded on it, has arisen among us under the name of codification, or code making in the abstract, whereby any people, for a reasonable consideration, may be accommodated with a patent code, more easily than curious individuals with patent breaches, for the people does not need to be measured first. In fact, if we look deeper, we shall find that this faith in mechanism has now struck its roots down into man's most intimate primary sources of conviction, and is thence sending up over his whole life and activity innumerable stems, fruit-bearing and poison-bearing. The truth is, men have lost their belief in the invisible, and belief and hope and work only in the invisible. Or, to speak it in other words, this is not a religious age. Only the material, the immediately practical, not the divine and spiritual, is important to us. The infinite absolute character of virtue has passed into a finite conditional one. It is no longer a worship of the beautiful and good, but a calculation of the profitable. Worship, indeed, in any sense, is not recognized among us, or it's mechanically explained into fear of pain or hope of pleasure. Our true deity is mechanism. It has subdued external nature for us, and we think it will do all other things. We are giants in physical power. In a deeper than metaphorical sense, we are titans that strive, by heaping on mountain, to conquer heaven also. The strong mechanical character, so visible in the spiritual pursuits and methods of this age, may be traced much farther into the condition and prevailing disposition of our spiritual nature itself. Consider, for example, the general fashion of intellect in this era. Intellect, the power man has of knowing and believing, is now nearly synonymous with logic, or the mere power of arranging and communicating. Its implement is not meditation, but argument. Cause and effect is almost the only category under which we look at and work with all nature. Our first question with regard to any object is not what is it, but how is it? We are no longer instinctively driven to apprehend and lay to heart what is good and lovely, but rather to inquire as onlookers how it is produced, whence it comes, and whither it goes. Our favorite philosophers have no love and no hatred. They stand among us not to do nor to create anything, but as a sort of logic mills, to grind out the true causes and effects of all that is done and created. An order of Ignatius Loyola, a Presbyterianism of John Knox, a Wycliffe, or a Henry VIII, are simply so many mechanical phenomena, caused or causing.